Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, March 15th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. Today in Riverside, we are looking at a high of 87.3 degrees and a low of 63.7, so make sure to keep cool if you are heading outdoors in that heat. It is certainly a very warm start to the day. Coming up on the program, we are examining the specific events that led to the recent increase in U.S. military actions involving Iran. We will also be digging into the legal and constitutional battle happening in California regarding the status of a dormant pipeline. Beyond those major headlines, we have plenty of other stories to get to as well. There is a lot to discuss this morning, so we hope you stay with us for the full update. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We start this morning with the growing military crisis in the Middle East. It's now been just over 2 weeks since the United States and Israel launched a massive preemptive strike against Iran. That operation, which the Trump administration calls Operation Epic Fury, has spiraled into a multi-front regional war. Ethan has been tracking every development. Ethan, bring us up to speed on where things stand this morning.
Grace, what we're looking at today is no longer a targeted strike. It's a full-blown regional conflict touching countries that never expected to be involved. Since that first wave of attacks on February 28th, we've seen Iranian retaliation hit neutral nations, NATO allies scrambling to defend their airspace, and global oil markets in turmoil. The Washington Post and BBC News are both reporting that the pace of escalation over the past week has caught even seasoned diplomats off guard.
One of the most surprising developments has been the attacks on Oman. Why is that so significant?
Oman has been the quiet peacemaker of the Gulf for decades. It's the country that hosted secret back-channel talks between the U.S. and Iran going back to the Obama era. So the fact that Iranian drones and missiles have hit Omani soil multiple times is really jarring. The Washington Post and The National both report that fuel storage tanks at the port of Salalah were struck by Iranian drones just 4 days ago on March 11th, igniting massive fires. The British maritime security firm Ambry confirmed that merchant ships in the area weren't damaged, but the port infrastructure took a serious hit.
And there was another strike, even more recently than that, right?
That's right. Just 2 days ago, on March 13th, Iranian drones hit the Alawi industrial zone in Sohar province in northern Oman. 2 foreign national workers were killed, and several others were injured. Democracy Now! Reports that the human toll of this conflict in the Gulf is falling hardest on the region's enormous expatriate labor force, mostly South Asian workers, who have no stake in this fight. An earlier attack on the port of Duqm also damaged fuel storage facilities and injured workers there.
How is Iran explaining these strikes on a neutral country?
Tehran's new leadership is calling them false flag operations, claiming they're designed to drag neutral nations into the war on the American side. Sultan Haytham bin Tariq al-Said isn't buying that explanation at all. He's issued a formal condemnation. It's a remarkable rupture for a country that has spent years carefully maintaining ties with both Washington and Tehran.
Meanwhile, Turkey is dealing with Iranian missiles entering its airspace. What's happening there?
This one has enormous implications because Turkey is a NATO member. ABC News and the Times of Israel report that NATO forces have now intercepted at least 3 Iranian ballistic missiles over southeastern Turkey. The first came on March 4th, a missile traveling through Iraqi and Syrian airspace toward Hatay province that was neutralized by NATO assets in the eastern Mediterranean. A second was shot down over Gaziantep province on March 9th, with debris landing in empty fields dangerously close to U.S. and NATO bases.
And the third interception was just 2 days ago?
Exactly. On March 13th, a missile was intercepted over the city of Batman, where there's a military drone base. Sirens went off across the area. After that incident, the U.S. State Department ordered non-emergency personnel out of the consulate in Adana and told all American citizens to leave southeastern Turkey immediately. Turkish President Erdogan warned Tehran that Turkey will defend its territory, quote, without hesitation, end quote. But Iranian President Pezeshkian has personally denied that Iran is targeting Turkey at all.
Let's talk about the leadership situation inside Iran. The initial strikes killed Supreme Leader Khamenei. What's happened since?
This is one of the most extraordinary storylines of this entire conflict. On March 8th, the Assembly of Experts appointed Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader. BBC News notes, this is the first dynastic succession in the history of the Islamic Republic, which is a huge deal in a system that was founded on rejecting monarchy. But here's the real question hanging over everything. Nobody has actually seen Mojtaba since his appointment.
So there are doubts about whether he's even able to lead?
Serious doubts. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has claimed that Mojtaba was, quote, wounded and likely disfigured, end quote, during the initial strikes. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi insists the new leader is in, quote, complete health, end quote. But CNN reports that a speech attributed to Mojtaba on March 12th was read on television by a news anchor, not delivered by the man himself. Iran International suggests this may confirm reports of severe facial trauma or even a coma. If Iran's supreme leader is incapacitated, it raises massive questions about who's actually making decisions right now.
What about the Strait of Hormuz? That's a choke point for global energy.
It's the choke point. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through it. The New York Times and the Hindu report that Iran is claiming the strait is open, but only to vessels with no links to the U.S. or Israel. In practice, the security situation has scared off most commercial shipping entirely. Oil prices are pushing toward $120 a barrel, and that's being felt at gas pumps around the world right now.
And the U.S. struck Kharg Island on March 13th. That's Iran's main oil export hub.
It was a massive precision bombing raid. CENTCOM says about 90 military targets were hit, including missile bunkers and naval mine storage, and the Pentagon used the word, quote, obliterated, end quote. But here's the interesting part. The primary oil export terminals on the island were deliberately left intact. President Trump posted on Truth Social that he spared the infrastructure, quote, for reasons of decency, end quote. He then warned that Kharg Island's oil terminals would be the next target if Iran keeps blocking international shipping. It's an unusual mix of restraint and threat.
Let's step back to the justification for this whole operation. The administration said Iran posed an imminent nuclear threat.
And that's where this story gets really uncomfortable for Washington. NPR and the Washington Post both highlight a stunning detail. On February 27th, just 24 hours before the strikes began, Omani mediators announced a major diplomatic breakthrough. Iran had agreed to downgrade its uranium enrichment and accept permanent IAEA verification. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi has since stated there was, quote, no evidence, end quote, that Iran was building a bomb at the time of the strikes. Responsible Statecraft reports that critics are now arguing the imminent threat claim was a cover for a regime change operation that had been in the works for much longer.
The humanitarian numbers coming out of this conflict are staggering. What are we seeing?
They're grim and growing. Inside Iran, more than 3,000 deaths have been reported, including roughly 1,300 civilians. One of the most controversial incidents was a Tomahawk missile strike on a girls' school near an IRGC base that killed 168 people. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes targeting Hezbollah have killed more than 800 people and displaced 850,000. On the American side, at least 13 U.S. service members have died, including 6 crew members aboard a KC-135 refueling plane that crashed in Iraq.
Has Congress weighed in on any of this? This is a major war without a formal authorization.
That's a critical point. As of today, Congress has not formally authorized the use of military force. President Trump is relying on executive authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to conduct this entire campaign. Axios reports that earlier attempts to halt the war failed in both the Senate and the House. But a new resolution led by Representative Josh Gottheimer is expected to come to a vote the week of March 23rd. If it passes, it would start a 30-day clock, forcing the administration to seek formal congressional authorization.
And what's the administration saying about how long this goes on?
There's a real disconnect between Washington and Jerusalem on that question. President Trump claims the war is, quote, ahead of schedule, end quote, and nearly finished. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the campaign will continue, quote, as long as it is needed, end quote, to achieve total regime change and the complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear capabilities. Those are very different timelines, and it's not clear which one will win out. What is clear is that 2 weeks in, this conflict is widening, not winding down.
A lot to watch in the days ahead. Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that.
Of course, Grace.
We've got more news ahead this morning. Stay with us. We turn now to a major standoff between Washington and Sacramento that's been building for weeks. Chloe, you've been tracking this clash over offshore oil production in Southern California. Bring us up to speed.
Sure, Grace. 2 days ago, on March 13th, U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright issued a directive ordering a Texas-based company called Sable Offshore Corp. To immediately restart oil production off the Southern California coast. He invoked the Defense Production Act of 1950, which is a Cold War-era law that lets the federal government compel private companies to prioritize national defense needs. According to the Associated Press and the Winnipeg Free Press, the order covers 3 offshore platforms called Heritage, Harmony, and Hondo, plus a 122-mile pipeline system and a processing facility onshore. These assets have been sitting idle since 2015.
So why now? What's the national security argument here?
It goes back to the Iran situation. After joint U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on February 28th, Iran retaliated by blocking the Strait of Hormuz on March 2nd. Forbes and the Energy Information Administration have long described California as an energy island because it doesn't have crude oil pipelines connecting it to the rest of the country. That makes the state uniquely vulnerable when foreign oil supplies get cut off. Roughly 29% of California's foreign crude imports come from the Persian Gulf, and that accounts for nearly 18% of the state's total refinery feedstock.
And that's oil that's just not arriving anymore.
Exactly. West Coast refineries have lost an estimated 230,000 barrels of crude per day since the strait closed. Gas prices are racing toward $10 a gallon in parts of the state. Secretary Wright's argument is that these offshore platforms can produce around 50,000 barrels a day, which would replace roughly 1.5 million barrels of foreign crude each month. He also says it's critical for keeping more than 30 military installations on the West Coast fueled and mission-ready.
Now, this didn't come out of nowhere legally. What set the stage for this directive?
On the very first day of his second term, President Trump signed an executive order reversing Biden-era bans on offshore drilling. Bloomberg Law and Lawfare have both reported that the administration built on that by using the Defense Production Act to override the state and local regulations that kept these platforms shut down. The Department of Justice argues that under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, these federal orders preempt California laws like SB 237, which had specifically blocked the pipeline from operating.
And California is not taking this quietly.
Not at all. The Los Angeles Times and Cal Matters both describe this as a major constitutional confrontation. Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta have called the order flatly illegal. Bonta actually filed a lawsuit back in January, asserting that the state maintains regulatory authority over pipelines running through Santa Barbara and Kern counties. State officials are making a 10th Amendment argument, saying the federal government is commandeering state regulatory processes in a way the Constitution doesn't allow.
Is there an environmental angle to California's pushback too?
A huge one. State officials keep pointing back to the 2015 Refugio State beach oil spill. A corroded pipeline, then owned by Plains All-American Pipeline, leaked over 100,000 gallons of crude onto the coastline. California argues the pipeline infrastructure is structurally unsound after sitting dormant for over a decade. They say the federal government is using the war as a pretext to skip the safety permits and inspections that would normally be required before you restart something like this.
What does the federal government say to that?
The DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion on March 3rd, arguing that Defense Production Act orders carry the force and effect of federal law. They go so far as to say those orders can even excuse companies from existing federal consent decrees. So in their view, the DPA essentially creates a legal override that sweeps aside both state regulations and prior federal court agreements. It's an extraordinarily broad reading of the statute.
Has anyone pushed back on that interpretation from a legal standpoint?
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting. Bloomberg Law has highlighted the 2024 Supreme Court decision in Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, which ended what's known as Chevron deference. That's the old doctrine where courts would defer to a federal agency's interpretation of ambiguous statutes. Now courts are required to conduct what's called a de novo review, meaning judges independently decide whether the Defense Production Act actually grants the power to preempt state safety laws. Legal experts say that could actually favor California because a court no longer has to take the administration's word for what the DPA allows.
So this could end up being a landmark case on executive power.
It really could. You've got wartime national security claims colliding with state sovereignty, environmental law, and a brand new framework for how courts evaluate federal agency authority. NPR and the Winnipeg Free Press have both framed this as a significant escalation in the broader battle between the Trump administration's energy-first national security approach and California's commitment to environmental regulation.
Let's talk about the company at the center of this. Who is Sable Offshore?
Sable Offshore Corp. bought these assets from ExxonMobil in 2024 through a highly leveraged deal worth about $1.2 billion. According to Street Insider and Market Screener, the purchase agreement includes something called a reverter clause. If Sable fails to bring oil to market and generate enough revenue to refinance its debt by March 31, 2027, the assets automatically revert back to ExxonMobil. That deadline is barely a year away.
So critics are saying this directive is really about saving the company?
That's exactly the argument. Critics call it a federal power grab designed to rescue Sable from that looming deadline by letting them bypass the state injunctions that have stalled production for years. They say the national security justification is being used as cover for what's fundamentally a commercial bailout. The timing raises eyebrows because Sable's financial viability depends entirely on getting oil flowing before that reverter clause kicks in.
Where do things stand right now, as of today?
It's a volatile standoff on multiple fronts. After the March 13th directive, Sable notified the Santa Barbara County Fire Chief that it intended to start moving oil through the Las Flores pipeline within 24 hours. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals hasn't issued a stay on California's environmental injunctions, but Sable has gone ahead anyway under the executive authority of the Defense Production Act. So the company is essentially operating in a legal gray zone.
Is there any court ruling expected soon?
A full ruling from the Ninth Circuit on the federal preemption question isn't expected until July, but there's been an important development already. On March 13th, Judge Michelle Williams of the Central District of California ordered the federal government to turn over internal communications. She suggested agencies may have acted in bad faith to fast-track the restart specifically for Sable's benefit. That discovery order could be very revealing if it shows coordination between the administration and the company that goes beyond legitimate national security planning.
Has anyone been held in contempt for defying court orders?
Not yet. Governor Newsom has publicly accused Sable of defying court orders, but no formal finding of contempt has been issued by the state courts. That could change quickly depending on how things develop in the coming days. Everyone is essentially watching to see whether a court steps in to halt operations or whether Sable continues pumping oil under federal authority while the legal battles play out over the next several months.
It's remarkable that a pipeline dormant for over a decade is now at the center of all this.
It really is. That pipeline has become a symbol of a much bigger national debate about the limits of executive power during wartime. You've got energy security, constitutional law, environmental safety, and corporate finance all tangled together in one case. However, the courts ultimately rule this is going to set precedent for how far a president can go in overriding state authority when invoking national defense.
Chloe, thank you for walking us through all of that. A lot of moving pieces to watch in the weeks ahead.
Thanks, Grace. I'll keep following it.
Here are some other headlines. Hollywood is rolling out the red carpet tonight for the 98th Academy Awards at the Dolby Theater. Comedian Conan O'Brien is back to host for the second year in a row, hoping to, Red D, the audience for another night of glitz following his acclaimed 2025 performance. Ryan Coogler's supernatural thriller, Sinners, is already a winner in the history books, entering the ring with a record-breaking 16 nominations. That is more than Titanic or La La Land ever managed to reel in. The film is a heavyweight contender for Best Picture, Director, and Actor from Michael B. Jordan. Not far behind is Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another with 13 nods. The Academy is also casting a wider net this year, debuting the Best Casting category, the first new competitive Oscar since 2001. Officials hope Conan keeps viewership zooming on social media. Across the globe, nearly 79 million eligible voters in Vietnam took to the polls today to elect 500 deputies to the 16th National Assembly. Following the ruling Communist Party's Congress in January, which confirmed General Secretary To Lam as the top leader, the nation saw a massive assembly of support. With 864 candidates vying for seats, nearly 93% represent the Communist Party, leaving only 65 independents to run. State media says turnout was electrifying, reaching 97.71% nationwide by mid-afternoon. This legislative pillar will formally approve the new government in April, aiming for 10% annual economic growth. Results surface March 25th. Mother Nature is showing her tempest side in the United States as a March megastorm left nearly 600,000 customers powerless across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. In Nebraska, the situation turned blustery and tragic. Officials confirmed at least one death in Arthur County linked to a massive wind-driven wildfire. That blaze has devoured over 700 square miles and 12 structures. With record gusts reaching 85 miles per hour, even a school roof in Niles, Illinois couldn't hold its hair on, collapsing under the strain. Utility companies are shocked by the damage to the aging power grid, facing a multi-day recovery. It is Selection Sunday, and the basketball world is hooping for clarity. The NCAA will reveal the 68-team brackets for the men's and women's tournaments tonight on CBS and ESPN. All eyes are on the Auburn Tigers and head coach Stephen Pearl. With a record of 17 wins and 16 losses, they might become the first team to receive an at-large bid with 16 defeats. It is a bubbly situation that has teams like SMU and Texas feeling the madness already. Tournament play tips off in Dayton, Ohio. Finally, a cutting investigative report from ProPublica reveals that Florida hospitals have used emergency court orders to force pregnant women into C-sections. Cases involving Black women like Sharice Doyley and Brianna Bennett show a labor IOUS legal shift toward fetal personhood, where judges now rule over the patient's very own bedside. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.